Hello, everyone. I'm so happy that you're here today, or if you're watching this a bit later, I'm super happy that you've decided to click on this and learn a little bit more about how to plan for your edTPA or your CalTPA. My name is Nia Civil. I'm the owner and founder of Glow Education, and we really just focus a lot on best supporting future teachers and current teachers on how to get their credentials, their licenses, how to succeed with their observations, so on and so forth. So today we're going to be speaking about the best and most straightforward way to lesson plan for your edTPA or CalTPA. This might seem to be a little bit more centered towards the edTPA, but with the CalTPA, there are very few actual differences, and the ways in which you pick your lessons, the strategies that you'll use will still be the same. Of course, any questions, comments, concerns, please do feel free to let me know, put it in the chat, or of course, you can always reach out to me after. So again, a little bit about me. I have been a TPA coach or consultant since about 2018, which to me feels like it was just yesterday, and it kind of freaks me out that it wasn't or hasn't been. And really, my focus is on best supporting teachers, like I said before. So myself and my now lovely team of coaches offer one-to-one support for your edTPA or your CalTPA, your RICA, your national boards, etc. Whether that includes having a detailed task or cycle review, a video conference where we go through what you need to do step by step and help you create what you need to create, and more. So I don't want to spend too much time focused on that, but I do feel it's important for you all to know just in case. And stay tuned because I'm planning on putting a lot more resources out on YouTube, and we already have some out on Substack as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you your tips and strategies first, so you can figure out the best way to plan for your lessons for your edTPA or CalTPA. Then once we get done with that, I'll show you a real sample. And this is a sample that came from a client that I worked with who, of course, passed. So that's how we're going to do it. Just so you know, if you're like, well, wait, I really want to see images and visuals, don't worry, that will come. We're going to do that at the end or the latter half of this video, I'll say, just so that you get a really good base of knowledge first. And then when we see this lesson plan, we're going to go through it step by step. Alrighty. And regarding time, if this goes over time and you need to kind of hop off because you have extra obligations, go for it. Of course, you guys will all be sent this recording at the end anyway. And yeah, I think that's about it. Alrighty. One of my very first top tips when it comes to picking your lessons and your topic for your edTPA or your CalTPA, and honestly, this even goes for your observations too, just in general. I want you to be clear on what you're doing and do not spend too long thinking about it. Honestly, what I told clients that I work with, you're going to pick your topic for your lesson plans, and you have by the end of the day or by tomorrow to have it picked. Once it's picked, stick with it. Unless it is something where, you know, maybe you've already picked it, but you kind of haven't started your TPA yet. And then you see this and you're like, oh my gosh, I picked something that Nia said, do not do. And there's very few, but we'll get to that. Unless it's something like that, stick with what you have. Because the thing is, your lessons are not scored for your TPA. They are reviewed and they're taken and looked at in the context of your commentaries or, you know, for a TPA or your write-ups for the CalTPA. That doesn't mean that it doesn't matter what you put in it, but it does mean if a line is out of place, if something isn't 100% fully clear, that's not necessarily going to count against you, because what your scores are looking for are to be able to see that you can explain your choices for why you decided to teach what you decided to teach, right? They're not looking for the perfect lesson plan. I mean, think about how unfair that would be if they were scoring who could have the best lesson plans with the most technology and the most resources. That's not fair because not everyone has that, right? So knowing that, you're going to pick your topic. If you're watching this in real time, I want you to have your topic picked by the end of today or by tomorrow. I know that's very scary. Again, my point is it literally doesn't matter how perfect your lesson plan is. It just needs to make sense and be feasible and not be something that'll that will be something that you'll regret later. And I'm going to tell you the couple options that are things that you would regret. Other than that, you're good. Pick something, stick with it, and move on. I've met up with some of you who are like, hey, listen, I've been trying to figure out for the past month what my lesson plan should be on. Absolutely not. You're going to pick something and you're going to move on, and you are going to force yourself to be satisfied with it, because the edTPA, your TPAs in general, even by extension, RICAs, things like that, they can seem very, very nerve wracking, and they are. And when something is very stressful and nerve wracking for you, it can make it so that you are very indecisive, basically. So, in order to combat that, we're going to do it this method: pick something, pick it quickly. For elementary candidates, especially regarding the edTPA, just in general, actually, you are picking either comprehension or composition, not both. I want you guys to kind of release the concept of what you typically do in your classroom. I think that beats up a lot of you, right? Where you're like, okay, well, typically in the classroom, we do it this way and that way. That's great. If that is not what's required for your edTPA, don't do it. There's really, when it comes to your TPAs, no ifs, ands, or buts. And a lot of you lose points because you kind of try to slide around the requirements and what's necessary. You kind of trying to see, well, maybe if I can do a little bit of both. If it's asking you to pick one or the other, pick one or the other. I'm sorry, not really, I can't even lie. I'm not sorry, but if it sounds a little bit strict, I know I'm saying it like this because I've met so many of you over the past, how many years? Long enough. 7-ish plus years, whatever that is, that get so in your heads that you're thinking, okay, well, if I do a bit of both, that'll get me more points. That's not only is that not how it works, your rubrics literally are not set up like that. Elementary candidates, you're going to do your lessons focused on comprehension. Think about like understanding a concept regarding reading a story, even somehow like a somewhat of a media base, even, or composition, where they're creating sentences, creating writing pieces. Yes, if you wanted to, elementary candidates, you could do the reading piece and then you're writing about what the students have to write about what they read. I'm just saying, if you do that, you do have to be very careful, because if your focus is comprehension, that means you can't say you're scoring your students on composition. So please release the urge to combine the two. You don't need to. For upper grades, pick your one topic and stick with it. Do not blend. I tend to see this with a lot of you who have secondary history, where I don't know what it is, but there's a lot of different topics, a lot of different things to cover. And then I'll look at the lesson plans that some of you show me before we get into it and start working together. And the lesson plans are covering 3 different like maybe 3 different societies, or they're covering one grand, very large society and a lot of different pieces and parts of it. And then if I were to ask, okay, what is this central focus? It's like, well, we're doing a little of this, a little of that, a little of that. Pick your one and stick with it. I understand it's uncomfortable because that might not be realistic to what you're doing. Keep going. Pick your one main topic or focus. It'll make your life so much easier. And that's literally what you're required to do. Okay. So tip number 1, usually I don't start with knots, but that's what we're going to do in this case, just because I want this to be so clear. The topics that you may think are the most basic can actually be quite difficult. I've seen it all at this point. There's always a couple of you, not you guys, hopefully, but there's always a couple of people every year that really throw out something really amazing. And by amazing, I say this very facetiously and sarcastically, where I'm like, wow. But I've pretty much seen it all. And my point is, I know the way a lot of you might be thinking about this, and I don't mean it in a mean way. I understand where you're coming from, where there's a part of you, whether consciously or subconsciously, that's thinking, okay, I just want this done. I'm going to pick this topic. It's so simple. It's straightforward, right? 90% of the time, it will not translate like that. A very common and classic example is for my early childhood candidates or my elementary candidates that are teaching kindergarten. Doing your entire edTPA or CalTPA on the alphabet is so deeply not recommended. I mean, I want you to think about it, right? When you look at everything you have to do for your edTPA, for example, you have so much that you need to write about, so much that you need to analyze. Do you think it will be in any way easier for you to write, let's say, total almost 30 pages worth of analysis on how well your students did on the alphabet? That sounds like torture, right? I mean, you're going to get to task 3 for the edTPA, where you have to explain your students, how your students did on the assessment and why they did the way they did, why you think they did the way they did. Especially as a newer teacher, and because a lot of us, honestly, are not taught this in our school programs or university programs about how to break down the understanding of the alphabet and acquiring those basic letter sounds, it is going to be extremely, extremely difficult for you to write in detail about why your students did not pick up the letter G. You know what is a lot easier, at least in comparison? Being able to write about why your students confused two of the main characters in a story. That is a lot easier to write about than which letter your students didn't understand, and going deep into detail with that. Personally, when I people work with me one-on-one, and I don't think I said this, only time I'm going to say it, probably not. Maybe I'll say it one more time. Think I put my website in the beginning and it's also in the end, and that's where people can book anything. Just in case for those of you that are wondering, when I have people that have come to me and they have alphabet portfolios, I'm like, listen, we're going to do all the work. I'm here. I'm supporting you. We are not going to do the alphabet. We're going to rewrite the lesson plans. We're not doing it. It just makes it such a nuisance, and truly it will be very difficult for you to score points. So look at this area in the middle here. I want you to pick something that gives you a lot of wiggle room. Again, it's easier to explain how or why your students did the way they did regarding reading comprehension on a story or something for elementary, or something activity-based and less abstract. Again, for the early childhood candidates, language acquisition is quite abstract. It is not as, I mean, this is why kindergarten teachers that are very seasoned will tell you kindergarten is not the easier age to teach. It's a really sweet age. It is not the easier age to teach because you're teaching these children the basics of life. So think about that, right? That is quite abstract. So some examples of what you could switch to. You're thinking of doing the alphabet for pre-K? Maybe you switch to doing main characters. That is something where even a student that is very much struggling, they're going to be much more likely to point out successfully who is the main character or the focus of a story. Who is the main character or the focus of a story each day, right? Different story each day, they point out the key characters. That is something that even struggling students will more likely than not be able to do. Meanwhile, you can go an entire school year and there might be students, and I've been seeing this honestly a lot more since the pandemic, who have letters and sounds that they have not picked up yet, right? Younger ones, again, counting can go either way. I have seen some success with it, but instead of just doing, okay, we're going to count 1 to 10, and especially if you're doing like for CalTPA, like your cycle 1 on math, which I don't recommend. I recommend you doing literacy first and then math. You'll be fine either way. But if you have the option to choose, I would recommend you doing that. Or for edTPA, doing the 3 tasks that are literacy and then task 4 mathematics instead of the inverse. But regardless, you can do fine with counting. But what if it was a bit more like, okay, you're identifying numbers within a specific range with manipulatives or recognizing patterns, something a little more honed in, right? You can do something on general grammar conventions, or something that's easier for the edTPA purposes might be writing sentences about a specific topic. Does that kind of make sense? I'm trying to think of an example for, I had a performing arts client recently, secondary, and we did, we were focusing specific on different genres of music, right? Now, someone might think maybe performing arts or something like that. Oh, music notes, right? I think that's almost like the kind of like the alphabet or counting, but for music. With her students, especially, that would not have been something for them to easily pick up. But then being able to listen to different songs and decipher the genres made a lot more sense. So what we did was her students focused on the difference between, I think it was jazz, blues, and rock, and they had kind of had to find the key details between each one, right? Secondary science, you're doing a biology lesson. This is not where you want to pick something that seems so simple that it's actually quite difficult. Now that I've worked with you guys with biology before, an idea of something like that escapes me right now. I can say what works though. I mean, I've even seen a really successful one on cell functions. Cell functions are great, especially if you hone in on just like two or three of them as opposed to all of them. That could be really good. But continuing. So for your TPA, you're more likely than not, especially at TPA, going to be taxed to do between 3 and 5 lessons. There's absolutely no reason you need to do 5 lessons. I actually don't recommend it. For whatever you are watching this presentation for, whatever the minimum amount of lessons is, that is what you're going to do. Again, Pearson, they give you guys rubrics, right, on what you will be scored on. Nothing is interpretive with your TPA, meaning your thought about, oh, maybe if I do 5 lessons, it'll look better. It doesn't matter. That's not what you're being scored on. They are not like, they are legally, because this involves you getting your license or your credential, they are legally not allowed to be interpretive with your scoring like that. You're scored on exactly what is in your rubrics. And then, of course, making sure that you don't have any condition codes, and the condition codes are basically like your scorer's ability to access your work. So something like, oh, well, if I do more lessons, that'll look better. Something looking better or not is not being scored. That's not a part of your rubric. That does not move the scale in any way possible. Only do 3. So I want you to pick something sensible for your lessons. This box on the left says, your TPA is not the time to pull out all of your new tricks. And I'm very serious about that. Now, it can kind of feel like a little bit of a performance, right? Because we're teaching in a way that we don't usually do. We're going a lot more in detail. We're going a lot slower than we usually have time to do. But this is not where you want to go crazy with every single new trick you can find. You might be nervous, but that again doesn't mean that you need to go crazy and put on an entire show. In fact, it makes it a lot more difficult. And I've worked with clients before who have come to me, and you can come to me at any point in your journey, but they've come to me after they've made their lessons. And we look at their lessons together, and we'll get to this in a bit. There's 10 different standards. The lessons are like 2 or 3 hours long, which they're not supposed to be anyway. Because I know me saying that is probably going to freak some of you out. Only what is shown in your video clips is what you will submit to Pearson, but you don't need your wait while you're teaching your TPA lessons shouldn't be super long anyway. That just makes it more difficult for you to weed through the footage, right? But anyway, her lessons were super, super long. They were super long in writing, despite the lesson plan saying that you can only have that there was a specific page limit. So many standards, so many key vocabulary words, so many activities. And that was a reflection of how nervous she was and how insecure she was in her confidence and her ability to get this done. So she overcompensated massively. And her lessons were, it was almost like it got to the point where it's like a very polished mess, right? Because there was so much that she had in there, which was her way of like subconsciously trying to overcompensate and prove what she can do. that it really was holding her back, right? Pick something sensible. It can be very routine. It can almost be kind of simple. That's fine. And it is very much okay to, and if you're wondering, like, okay, Nia, like, what did you do with that client? We redid everything. Because we're not going through such a detailed process with you being that stressed out about something that we could have changed quickly. So it is okay to do something like a topic that is similar to what your students have done before. In fact, I think it's actually recommended, right? Because the cool thing with kids is you could have taught something like every day of the week, and there is still a good chance that you're going to have a couple kids that are like, what? What is this? I've never seen this a day in my life. All it has to do is like rain outside or be a Monday, be a little muggy and humid outside, and all of a sudden your kids might forget everything. It's hilarious. No, but honestly, I actually really do recommend it because you can teach something similar to what your students already know or something that your kids have already done. Again, honestly, but you teach it in a different method with different strategies and different activities. They might actually love that and appreciate you for that. I highly recommend it. So you can teach something new, but it has to be something your students are ready for. This is not where you want to experiment because, especially because a lot of you will literally, I don't say this jokingly, literally be in tears when you have all of the stress on you about your TPA. And then you've decided, let's teach something totally new that they've never seen before. That's a big challenge. And now you're on camera and you're being recorded and there's a lot of stakes in this, and then your kids aren't getting it and it's slowing down everything and you have to explain things over and over and over again. You will lose your mind. You're going to be so stressed out. So it's different if like it's something new but your students have been working towards this for a very long time. That makes a lot of sense to do. Something brand new that the students don't really have a skill set for, or something that's very experimental, not what you want to do. um, if your cooperating teacher is requiring you to use a pre-made curriculum, that is fine. I will say, and this is going to seem a little bit tough love, of all of the people I've met, thousands of you at this point, well, thousands of teachers, but of the hundreds of you or dozens, hundreds of you that I've met over the years that have said, well, my teacher has like a pre-made curriculum. We can't teach. I've only ever seen maybe like 5 people that truly could not teach what they wanted or a version of what they wanted for their TPA. What tends to be the issue is more of like a confidence thing where you're seeing the pre-made curriculum. Maybe your cooperating teacher is like, well, I prefer you do this topic, or this is the manual that we usually use, right? And you're going, oh my gosh, okay, okay, my hands are up back against the wall. You absolutely can assert yourself and say, well, this is because you're you're not there to serve your host teacher. Your host teacher is there to serve you. I know that sounds like a radical concept, but that's why they sign on to have you. They didn't sign, they're not supposed to sign on to have you as a student teacher to have you basically be a servant and like a, you know, like a maid in the classroom for a couple months. They sign on to have you so that, yes, you're learning, but truly so that you can learn. Meaning, and they all know this. They can pretend they don't, they all know this. Whatever you require to get your license, and that's in the realm of their classroom, they need to support you in doing that. You can find whichever way you want to mention that to remind them of that, but that is supposed to be very, very clear. And I think some of you forget that and you're like, well, my cooperating teacher said this and this, and this is the curriculum we have. You can, again, work with the curriculum you have. You're just going to have to write up the lessons and everything yourself on a separate document. Don't just take screenshots of it. But be very, very, stand in your proper power as a student teacher. There is not supposed to be any such thing. And again, if you're like, well, my host teacher is mean, cool, they're mean. The truth still stands. You have what you need to do what you need to get done, and your host teacher is supposed to support you with that. And the cool thing is, there's really very little flag or like career sort of like pushback you would get from um, asserting that. And honestly, if it came down to it and you needed to, it is not difficult to pull off to the side for a little bit, ask another teacher, hey, can I teach this in your classroom? It again might sound nerve wracking for some of you, but I really want that to be clear. So this is from the edTPA handbook. You guys all have handbooks, and it's about possible essential literacy strategies. So we'll go over this a little bit later, but I do want you to kind of look at this regarding skills you can focus on teaching. Um, and you can take this into various different subject matters. So, like analyzing a character, an argument, a dynamic in history, right? A specific society. But get deeper if you're doing something like that with a society. Summarizing plot or main ideas. Note taking graphic organizer work for composition works really well. Um, Revisions, writing opinion pieces, retelling a story. Again, you're doing history, retelling a historical event. For my science candidates and math candidates, drawing evidence, using evidence, showing evidence regarding a specific type of like mathematical work. That's a really great one. Okay. Next, I want you to use your resources. Like I said, I don't want you thinking about this too long. So use your resources to help you. Pinterest, Teacher Pay Teachers, even ChatGPT, and I'm going to give you a note on that in a second, are awesome for finding activities, and this got a little cut off or split, ideas you can use. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, nor is it necessarily possible. We want you to complete this efficiently. So these are good websites and places that you can use just to find your, what would you call? Just to find resources, worksheets. You can make your own worksheets or you can find them here. K-12 read education.com is one. There's one called, I believe, reading.com. Correct me if I'm wrong. K-12 reading, K-12 worksheets. That's another great one. And they have like reading, math, etc. So these are going to be great places to find things. You can use ChatGPT and use it wisely. Use it wisely because I see some of you that think like, well, I can just put my prompt into ChatGPT and it'll do the whole commentary. I, with all love, called someone out on this just a couple days ago, and I was like, hey, I get it. I know you're stressed. I'm not the ChatGPT police. I want you to pass too. I'm just letting you know that the work ChatGPT gave you is very fancy crap. And it's not because AI is bad. It is because the edTPA or your TPAs in general, anything Pearson makes for you is so deeply context specific. Unless you are some AI boss and you know how to prompt, you know exactly what's being asked of you. Because if you know what's being asked of you, then you can accurately tell the AI what to create for you. If you have no idea what you're doing, you're not going to be able to tell it what to create. Unless you are well versed in that, you know how to revise. You know how to not take, you know how to not just take the first thing the AI is giving you and tweak it and tweak it and tweak it. You are not the person that's going to benefit from using ChatGPT when you're writing your commentary. I'm throwing that out there now. We're not even talking about the commentaries today, but just so it helps some of you out, because a lot of you are, it's creating these paragraphs for you and it doesn't know what it's actually creating it on because you don't know how to give it enough information because you're not sure what you're even doing, right? And the work is just, you're going to get 0 points. No, you're going to get, the lowest you can get is a 1, right? On each section, you're going to get 1s across the board unless they find a way to give you a condition code. Because regarding the rubrics, the AI is not answering the questions for you. It's not checking off what it needs to check off. Just throwing it out there. But what's awesome is you want to use ChatGPT to help you like create a lesson plan. Cool. Now, I have seen a couple people do this where it creates this lesson plan that you're adding in like all of these weird paragraphs of content and having it talk about going deep into theory and just like it's really odd and excessive. Don't have it do that. Let it give you like the bare bones, like the steps, and that's it. Let it give you some ideas. You can ask it like, hey, please help me think about like 5 to 10 ideas that I can do for a 3 lesson segment on for a eighth grade physical education class, and we're doing an outdoor lesson on whatever, right? Again, something like simple searches like elementary comprehension or literacy activities are things that can help you when you're looking for resources. And these can also you can also find unique ways to build up your lessons. So these include things like having hands-on manipulatives, adding in turn and talks, think pair shares, critical thinking questions, and higher order thinking questions, such as like Bloom's taxonomy, right? Adding in a reader's theater, games to review. So you can have a very basic topic, but add in these fun little activities to spruce it up. Okay. Now, tip number 4 is your setup. So you're going to benefit from having clearly structured lesson plans. You don't want your lesson plans, kind of like we said before, to be too all over the place. You want them to be clear. You want them to be concise, right? Because again, your lesson plans aren't scored, but they are reviewed in conjunction with your other documents. So adding in like paragraphs of justification in your lesson plan, that doesn't make sense. You want your lesson plan to look the way it would look if you had a substitute teacher who was like new on the job, and you wanted to make sure that that sub understood everything that they would need to understand step by step. That's how you want it to look. And don't worry. So I know some of you were doing this kind of in reverse. Some of you might have recorded already. Some of you were thinking, well, what if my lessons don't go exactly to plan what I do teach? When does it ever? When does it ever, right? I mean, we're teaching children. When does it ever go 100% to plan? Again, you're not being scored on your kids being perfect. Your kids are supposed to be kids. You're being scored and looked at on how well you work with your students when you get to that point in task 2, and how well you analyze your teaching, and the how well you analyze your students' acquisition or lack thereof of the skills that they needed to learn. You're not being scored on your lesson plans being perfect. Lesson plans are a plan because plans are a general setup of what you're expecting to do, so that you're not going in blind. You're not ever going to be scored on your teaching going exactly to plan or not. So I personally think that this is one of the best, just the best setup for your lessons, no matter what subject you're teaching. Um, you want to have an introduction, something to start the lessons off. It's engaging, it's exciting. It's only like 2 or 3 minutes long. A guided practice. So this is where you're actively teaching the concept, and you are like maybe working with the students to give them an opportunity to understand what they need to learn. Next is the independent practice, or semi-independent for those that have, they're teaching the little ones, or for those of you that are working with um, students of the special ed population. In addition, the English as a new language or English as a second language population who might need a lot more support, and they might not be able to really work on their own. So independent or semi-independent. Basically, this is where you want them to show you what they know, and to as much of a degree as you can, or they can, and you want them to be able to give you something tangible, um, an assessment, a worksheet, something like that, even an exit ticket. So in essence, you should be engaging with your students, working on the concept with them, and then giving them the space to show their understanding on their own. And the independent section is usually where the assessment happens. Assessment doesn't have to be crazy, especially, I know for CalTPA, I believe it's slightly different. Actually, I don't think it's too different at all. I think people just get a little bit confused with it. Your assessment doesn't even have to be this big test. CalTPA in particular, a lot of your assessments tend to be more given out more in day 3 or that final day, but you also would be fine if that wasn't the case. edTPA, what they're looking for is an assessment, and the assessment can come from day 1, it can come from day 2, it can come from day 3. Really, in general, for both portfolio types, edTPA or CalTPA, they want you to assess student learning. Typically, it ends up being what's given on the final day because that's like when you've worked with the students more. But if not, that's fine too. Okay, I think this is our last tip, right? Let's see. No, it's not. All right. So, tip 5, building. Your lesson plans will naturally build on each other, right? Um, you this stresses a lot of people out because a lot of people are like, well, I don't know if my lessons are building. Think of it this way. You wouldn't have thought to teach it if the lessons didn't build. Even if you've already taught this and you're now going back and like retroactively writing your lesson plans and you're worried, like, well, I don't know if they built on each other. They do, because as long as they made sense and your students weren't like confused out of their mind, they did. It's very rare for lessons to not build because, again, you taught them or you're planning on teaching them. You wouldn't teach this or you wouldn't think about teaching this if they didn't connect. So the issue typically isn't if the lessons build, but getting you to see how they already do so. And we'll talk about this more when I put out more videos and content about your task one commentary or your cycle one analysis as well. But just keep that in mind. So there are multiple ways to make sure that your lessons do build. Since they have to be on the same topic, right? I'm saying this because I've seen it. Um, I've seen people like day one is on phonics, day two is on problem solution, and day three is on math because they just, again, I get it. They did not understand what was required of them. So please make sure it's on the same topic, the same subject. You can build your lessons out in a few ways. It can be different ways of exploring one concept through activities. You can use increasingly difficult higher order thinking questions and prompts each day. You can remove supports with each day. So maybe the first day is the most scaffolded, and then you take away so the students are working more on their own. You can teach like two or three different kind of, I've seen some people do it where it's like day one is one type of topic. Like it's, let's see, day one is problem, day two is solution, day three is problem and solution, right? Something like that, where it culminates, or like building towards an end goal or a tangible result, which is great for composition and writing, where you're kind of teaching the steps and the frameworks. And then day three, you're doing the full like production, right? So those are kind of different ways you can structure it. Don't overthink this. Pick whichever way is easiest, whichever way makes the most sense, whichever way keeps you mentally healthy and from going crazy. Just pick one. I think this might be our last tip before we look at the sample. I'm just checking the chat. Yes, exactly. You got it. Okay. And yes, any other questions? Please do let me know. I know I'm going through it. I don't know if I'm going through it too fast or too slow, but again, please do let me know. But I'm glad you guys are getting it so far. So, with your standards, I want you to pick one or two. That's it. There's never a circumstance where you need more, no matter who tells you that or how much you've convinced yourself otherwise. Um, I've seen people who are like, well, I really just want this third one. It's like, okay, but being neurotic about something that isn't required, that doesn't really make sense, it's just not sensible for this process. If you haven't noticed, I am uh, very much into getting you through a process thoroughly and as quick and swiftly as possible without you making errors or holding yourself back. That's why I'm very this or that, all or nothing in a way, because there really isn't an in between. And I find that with this, a lot of the in betweens are just ways that a lot of you can add undue stress to yourselves because of how already stressed out you are. You might think, well, I need these three or four standards because I can't fit everything I need to. That's not how it works. When it comes to standards, standards are an umbrella. And this isn't just for your edTPA, your CalTPA, your RECA, your national boards. This is for everything, right? Standards are a general umbrella. Yeah. So when we talk about learning objectives and um, a central focus and all of these things, like that main sort of topic your lesson is about and what your students need to be able to do, You wouldn't, I'll think of it this way. If your school principal right now was like, what's like this main topic? Like, what's the main thing your students need to be able to do by the end of this lesson? You're not gonna name the main thing and then rattle off like the next like 8 things the students also have to do. Like, and oh, and it also would be nice if this, and it also would be nice if that. Your principal, if you guys have ever met school principals, they're amazing. Most of them are amazing. They really, odds are, if they're doing an observation or something, they don't have the time. They don't have the time to have you talk their ear off about the not even the secondary standard or the tertiary standard, but the like 15th standard or like sub skill that you want to focus on. That doesn't make sense. So why would you do that here? Central focus. That means main learning objective again. Main essential literacy standard. We'll get to that later. Essential. That's like one, right? Those are words that are signaling to you that you need to just focus on the main piece. So if you're really stressed because you have 6 7 standards, that means you are not understanding what a standard is. A standard is the general umbrella for that main portion of the lesson that's being focused on. That's it. If you're like, well, we're doing a little bit of art, so I want to add in an art standard, that doesn't make sense because that's not what your students are working towards. What is the main thing your students are working towards? And then find 1 to 2 standards that match. Now, this also stresses some people out because you're thinking, well, I can't find a standard that matches exactly. Why would you, right? Think of it this way. The people that make your Common Core standards, they don't know everything you're going to teach and the way you're going to teach it. They don't know that you're going to do character traits on a fiction folk tale of the 30s to write description. Like, how would they know that? You don't see things like that because it doesn't make sense for there to be standards like that. That's like when you talk about probability in math and how like there's so many odds and chances of things, then the amount of possibilities are endless. That's why the standards are there because they're the umbrella, the broad topic. You're going to pick the standard that matches the closest to what you're doing. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Do not be neurotic about this. I've seen some people say, like, well, standard mentions this word, and that's fine. You don't have to do 100% of what the standard says. Again, the standard's the general umbrella. It's just covering you. You might have some things that don't fully match, or there might be some things on that umbrella that don't fully apply to you. You're going under the umbrella. If you want, and you're like, oh my gosh, and you want to cross out the 2 or 3 words in the standard that don't match what you're teaching, fine. You really don't need to. It doesn't like benefit you more or not, to do so. I just want to make that very clear. And if it sounds like I'm going really hard about the standards, it's because I've literally seen people overthink and break down in tears about standards. And standards are supposed to be the quickest and easiest thing. It should be like fun to find them because you're just finding the umbrella and going, boop, I found it, and you're moving on. Clear? Right? So being super intense about your standards just really wouldn't make sense. Pick something that kind of matches and then move on. That's it. Okay. So now we are going to get to looking at a sample. And as we look at the sample, we're going to go through it piece by piece. And yeah, but in the meantime, this is my contact information. We have the website with all of the cool stuff. Instagram, Facebook it's something similar to this. You'll be able to find it. And the email. And feel free, of course, to email me if you guys have any types of questions. So this lesson plan that I'm going to show you, that is taking a minute to load. While it loads, I'll just explain this. This is for an elementary candidate. Now, I know not all of you are elementary. I want you to, when you're stressed, it can very much feel like you need to see exactly what you're doing the way you would do it to make sense of it. Trust me, you'll be fine. I promise. I'm going to explain each section because the sections are going to be the same for you guys regardless, right? So all of your lesson plans will go on the same page. You want to write them separately at first, you can. Combining them is going to be annoying. When you combine them, I would recommend getting a free subscription or trial if you can to like the PDF filer. I think it's PDF ILLER.com. um, or something similar, don't forget to cancel your free trial though, because then they're going to want to charge you like $100 for the year. And combining your different lesson plans that way. But here's a sample lesson. Now, the cool thing is there's no set lesson plan template, meaning this client, her university gave her this lesson plan template. There's no template that's better or worse. Again, it should just be clear. There are sections that you can add in that aren't required or necessary, right? Your lesson plan just needs to be clear. And like I said, you're only scored on what's in the rubric. So don't think that going too far above and beyond is going to really help you, right? You want to go above and beyond, go above and beyond the commentaries regarding, again, still what's in the rubrics. So she was given this template, and I was like, right, you have it, we can use it. I've seen every sort of template under in the book. Pick whatever works for you. I also have one as well that you guys can totally use if you would like. Just let me know. But whatever template you use and find, go for it, because the only times you have to stick to the templates are the ones that Pearson gives you, right? Like your context for learning, or like the about your students section, your edTPA or CalTPA. If there's no template given to you, you can do whatever you want with it. You could structure it however you want. It has to follow certain guidelines like page limits, but you can do whatever you want. Okay. I was looking for my water, but it is not there. That's fine. So just look at the structure. And again, any questions, do let me know. I also know, because a lot of you have said that you kind of just like to digest the information first and then discuss it after. So you're more than welcome to shoot me an email after this for any questions related to what you see here. This was a kindergarten candidate. You don't even have to put the number of students in the class. You can. Because for elementary, you have to do either comprehension or composition. That is what she put in this box here. That is not required, right? So as we go through, I'll tell you what's optional and what's not. This box here, again, not fully required. We did put lesson 1 at the top, but again, we put it here. Her university gave her this, where it asks her to put strategies that are being practiced or essential strategies. You can use this if you want. I think this would be confusing for a lot of you, so I don't even recommend it. If this makes sense to you, you can put it. You don't have to. What's more important are the standards, right? So she put, and this is especially important for California clients, you're always going to need your Common Core standards. That's for all of you, no matter where you are. For a lot of you that are in California, it might behoove you to put an ELD standard and check with your specific portfolio. You might not need it, or you might be able to reference it. I think it could be useful for you all to throw that in there. More often than not, it can tend to be necessary, but you don't have to typically. She threw in an ELD standard. Now, I know some of you were like, Nia, you literally said 1 to 2 standards. What is this? Basically, she had broken this down into the different different forms of like literacy support she would give for the different types of students she had in her classroom, because a lot of her students did not speak English. Even though that was the case, this still isn't necessary. You don't have to do this. This was someone she just wanted to, right? Because like 80% of her class didn't speak English, and she thought it would be just be useful. And I was like, right, fine. That being said, what we focused on in her commentary was this. This standard here is what got like the big focus, not these. These we barely touched on, because there's nothing really in your rubric that requires that. So even if you do throw these in, the Common Core standard, is fine. So I have to refresh on what this was about. Yes, okay. So she was, the main focus was identifying characters and settings in a fiction story. Major events were a little bit in there, but it was mainly characters and setting. Now, do you see how we didn't freak out that it said major events, even though we didn't really talk about major events throughout the whole learning segment, right? It's totally fine if you don't totally cover every piece of a standard as you go through. Central focus. Basically, what is this about? Don't overthink it. What are they learning? She said the students will learn to identify characters, settings, and major key details, not necessarily events in her case, but key details regarding the story, the birth they've had. This sentence is mainly what would be needed. We decided to add an extra detail that said they will engage in discussions and activity that deepen their understanding. Honestly, the sentence is fluff. I'm very anti-fluff. It doesn't really sway the scale either way. But you're describing what are your students learning, right? This is what they're learning how to do, not what they need to be able to accomplish per se, measurably by the end of the lesson. We'll get to that, right? So this section here, central focus is not optional. You need this. You have to have this for every lesson plan, realistically. For just teaching in general, have a central focus. This is what it's about. Now, she decided to write about personal, cultural, and community assets. Again, this came with her template. You do not need to have this. Do not feel like it will get you more points if you have this. This could be, I think this is useful to have in your own notes, not necessarily in your lesson plan, but just for yourself, so that when you're writing your commentaries and analysis, and you're asked, because there is a question that asks you, how are you connecting to your students' prior learning, prior knowledge, personal assets? You have like a little note about this in here, right? You don't have to have it, so I won't go too deep into it. Learning objectives. So learning objectives should be measurable. What should your students be able to, measurable and very clear and identifiable. What should your students be able to do, right? I even think you can add in, if you wanted to add in percentages or numbers, that would be great. I recommend that. We didn't put it in here, I remember this, but we did mention it more thoroughly in the commentary. So she had a content objective and a language objective. For anyone watching this and you're not in California, you don't worry about the language objective. If you are in California, I don't even think you should worry about the language objective unless you have an E and L portfolio. You can add it in if you want, but this content objective is what you need to have. This down here is optional. So in this case, it was students will be able to identify the main characters and setting and describe the major events that take place in the story. So that's what the students needed to do. You can even add in a number, like with 80% accuracy, if that's relevant to you, or with 4 out of 5 questions correct, right? And I do recommend that. So pick something just to spruce it up that, again, is measurable. What lets you know that they met the objective? Now, I believe in the time that we did this, there were only like 2 major characters and 1 setting. So that's why it was very concrete, like either they could identify or not how many main characters you're going to have, right? But in general, I think it's good to have something measurable for all portfolios. Your language function. A lot of portfolios, especially for the edTPA, have this. That being said, you don't necessarily need it in your lesson plan right now. If you're like, where do I go from here with this? Don't put it in. Your language function comes up in question 4 of your edTPA and similar, right? That basically is the underlying language skill that your students will need to utilize effectively to carry out the tasks of the lesson, right? It doesn't mean that they're being taught this function directly, but that they need to be able to do it, right? Like in order for the students to identify main characters, they need to be able to identify. In order for students to be able to discuss the similarities and differences between 2 different societies in history, right? They need to be able to compare and contrast or analyze, right? You'll often find that there can more than one can fit for what you're doing, but you can only pick one. If this is relevant to you, you can only pick one. Only one. That goes for everyone. Again, this is in a lot of portfolios, but you don't need to have it in your lesson plan. So you can keep it out. For her, it was very clear and she wanted it out of the way early, so she put it in. Language supports you can put, and these are things that will support your students in like the language acquisition or language usage, let's say usage process in your lesson plans. This helps them better discuss the concepts, discuss what they know, what they don't know, etc. Vocabulary you do need to have, right? These are key vocabulary terms that your students would need to be able to understand or to know to be able to understand your lesson or understand what you're asking of them. These can be words related to like the skills that they're learning, but it can also be words just clearly related to the story, right? And don't take for granted what words a student might not know. Like might not know. The word could be, I don't know, theme park, right? Amusement park. And you're thinking the students know what that is, but you might have a student that genuinely doesn't know. A word could be, I don't know, there's so many. Don't take it for granted, especially for for those of you that are teaching younger students, but also for those of you that are teaching secondary. I actually think this is very pertinent to you guys, especially if you're doing secondary history, secondary English, right? Secondary mathematics. Actually, secondary is huge the more that I think about it. There are so many specific vocabulary words that your students need to understand. Now, you don't need to define these terms and you don't need to go crazy like listing a bunch. I would say don't go over 10. I don't know how many of these are. This is probably like close to 10, if not a little bit more. Don't sift and search and search. Pick your 10. If more than 10 come up, but like they're coming up easily, go for it. Other than that, don't force yourself to go over 10. And when I say 10, I mean like 10 content specific terms. And then, of course, you have like the major ones relating to the skills, right? You don't need to define them, but you can if you want to. Do not define like the basic ones that are revolving around like the content. Again, like the word mitten. Don't define the word mitten. It's not because the definition doesn't matter. It's because that doesn't matter to your lesson plan. Don't define them. You don't get extra points for defining. So next, we have discourse or syntax. You do not need to have this in your lesson plan. This again was given to her by her university because her university like to attempt to prepare people for their edTPA, right? And this like is a question that comes up later in, I want to say it's not question 3. The question for B or C or something like that. In your, within question 4 of your commentary for the edTPA at least, it'll ask you like whether your students are utilizing discourse, discussions, or syntax, right? This is why this candidate has it in there, again, because her school wanted to prepare her and just to naturally think about that. You don't have to put this in your lesson plan. Do you guys see like how much you don't need to have in here? It's actually crazy when you think about it. You can put it in here. Discourse would be like where your students would be discussing things. 90% of you, unless you're doing, actually, discourse would go for every single one of you. Discourse or syntax is like the way it's described in your portfolio because you don't need to focus on both. Syntax can apply, but you should be having discussions for all of your portfolios, for all the students. I recommend just sticking to discourse if you do have it in there and discussing when or how the students will be having discussions with you. Syntax, that can especially deal with grammar though, arrangement of specific arrangements regarding math, order regarding like science and things, etc. That does come up. Your assessments, you do need this in here. Formal or informal assessments, formative or summative, you can pick the terms you want. Typically, more people write informal and then formal. Your informal assessments, that's when you're circulating the classroom. That's when you're understanding how the students are doing based on group activities and partner work, right? Your formal assessments, those are the things that the students are doing on their own or like semi on their own. Those are the things that the students are doing where they're producing something tangible for you or something that you can check off. Because for my elementary candidates, SPED candidates, checklists do work in general, right? Or can be utilized, I should say. So in this case, she had said that there's the discussions, observation and questioning. That's the more informal assessments or formative for learning. Summative, the more cumulative assessment or formal assessment. The students will complete a drawing activity. Again, this is kindergarten. If you're trying not to do like the drawing assessments, unless it truly applies to your students' age and grade level. This works really well for pre-K and kindergarten. I don't recommend any of you do that if you don't have that. Students will complete a drawing activity illustrating the main character and setting of the story, or dictate or write a simple sentence. So these are like modifications or differentiations depending on their literacy and skill level. But the base was the illustration for the main character. Okay, this here, not required. You can say like what students who are at different learning levels could be able to accomplish. You don't have to. What you do need is this area here with accommodations, and I think we put it, I'm just double checking. Okay, yeah, with accommodations, right? If you have IEP or 504 students, you can put like what changes you could make. Again, you don't have to make these. This is just what you could do. You can put what changes you could make to the lesson plan if needed. English language learners, gifted students. Accommodations, those are for the students that are mentioned in IEP 504, something that's mentioned like within paperwork, basically, or more classified. If you don't necessarily have this or you're a bit confused, you can combine it with the differentiation section and hold on a couple minutes and I'll show you what that looks like. This you do need. This is your instructional plan or the steps. You're literally just going to list out step by step what you'll do. You can say the teacher will or I will begin, doesn't really matter. When you're actually writing your commentaries and that whole big thing, you want to say I. For the lesson plans, it doesn't matter. Go step by step. For example, the teacher will begin by asking the students if they know what a character is. Then the teacher will explain blank, blank, blank. That's it. You don't have to give a paragraph. Step by step. That's the introduction, just how the lesson is starting. You can put how much time this will take. That's more for you than anything else. You don't need, this isn't required in your lesson plan. And so I'm just throwing that out there. This read aloud would technically be a part of guided practice. We decided to put it separate just so you, and this is just like a version so you can see, but it's totally okay if you want to put your read aloud in the guided practice section. That's typically the way it's done, but you don't have to, right? But you'll see it has those main steps that I mentioned earlier, right? There's an introduction, a guided practice, independent practice, and a closure. Read aloud. Teacher will read the story. Guide the students to identify the main character. Guided practice. This is what the teacher's doing with the students, like creating a chart on the board with different columns. Then they work together as a class to fill in the chart, etc. Independent practice, the students do like that assessment, they're drawing, stating what they made. Closure, teacher will like thank the students for what they did. You can do a thumbs up, thumbs down, like who understood what. Red, what is it, like red, yellow, green, based on how much you understood. You can let students share their illustrations. You can give an extra exit ticket, right? And this is for you to differentiate, like, what's your assessment versus the exit ticket, or is the exit ticket an assessment? Is the main assessment? That's up to you. You could do like a bonus exit ticket for funsies. If you wanted to, that's an option. In this case, I'm just making it clear. This was her assessment in here. The exit ticket was just for funsies. That was not her assessment. But if you wanted to, you could have an assessment be an exit ticket. And then the closure could just be like thanking the students for their hard work and moving forward, right? Um, okay. So we put the assessments up above. The last major thing are just your differentiations. So this is how you could potentially switch up your lessons based on what are possible like needs and dispositions of your students. Again, you don't have to do these things when you're teaching. It might not even be relevant. This is your way to show your scorers that you can make these changes and additions if you need to, right? That's it. Example, students that could be struggling with verbally identifying the character can receive a verbal sentence starter. Students can, this is funny, students can receive extra time if they're having trouble with focusing. Also, that's another thing. It happens. If you have like a typo or something put more than once, grammar is not graded or scored anywhere in your TPA or CalTPA, because again, it's not in the rubric. Now, of course, everything you put should be legible and understandable, but if you have like a typo or something that's repeated more than once, typically I'm so neurotic and making sure your work is perfect that this rarely happens. But there's a whole funny backstory with this. I actually remember exactly why we would have this put in twice. Nonetheless, all to say, we're human. Stuff happens. So if that freaks you out, like, oh my gosh, what if you're totally fine? For students that are English language learners, for example, or your student, if you have a specific one, he can sit next to a bilingual student to ask for help. Translations can be given. For students needing extra challenges, they can receive additional prompts. So you can think about different ideas for moving forward. And now we're not going to go through step by step the next two lessons because I think that would be pretty redundant. But I just want you to see like how it's very similar. The majority of this first part will be the same. So a lot of that first page of your lessons will be copy paste. Maybe the central focus changes a little bit, maybe. Oh, and you can put visuals of your supports in here, but you don't even need to. It's not required because there's a whole document for your TPA that requires that. So then in this one, we focused more on the setting. So it's the same story on day one. That was more of we talked about a lot of different things, but we focused more on the characters by the end of the lesson. This was the same story, but now it's just the setting that we focused more deeply on. So you can see how that builds, right? And then there was a similar assessment. There were like some drawings. I think I had to pick something like that. Lesson 3, similar. I remember we read a bit of the same story and then we added in a new story as well. So similar skills, right? Adding in more resources. We added in a different type of assessment, and that was it. So your lesson plans can seem a little bit daunting, but they don't have to be something that really freaks you out. Just start and get the ball rolling and do the best that you can. So now I'm going to open this up to any questions because a lot of you can tend to, or because a lot of you are open to getting a bit more specific. I'm going to stop the recording portion here. So I recommend if you are watching this live or you're here with us, anything that comes up, take notes. I typically just don't put the Q&A sections in the recordings that I make. So we're going to stop this here. And thank you so much for joining.